Viewers, quite recently, Aviation Minister Ram Mohan Naidu took to social media X to announce that he met teams from new aspiring airlines like Shankh Air, Alhind Air and FlyExpress. He said while Shankh Air has already gotten the NOC from the ministry, Alhind Air and FlyExpress received their NOCs this week. Now, let me draw your attention to a famous quote. If you want to be a millionaire, start with $1 billion and launch a new airline. Now, these are the words of Richard Branson, the man who made his fortune through a diverse range of business ventures under the Virgin Group. Ranging from the music industry, telecommunications, and many other sectors, the Virgin brand made a high presence in most spaces, including the airline business. But is it easy to start an airline, or should I instead ask, is it hard to survive? Do you know what's common between Jet Airways, Air Deccan, Kingfisher Airlines, Heritage Air, and Go Air? They all failed to sustain. Since 1995, roughly 18 airlines have shut shop. Reason? Highly competitive and high operational costs pushed many of these into bankruptcy. So today, to understand the ifs and buts of sustaining an airline business and the readiness of the aviation sector to digest new airlines, let's welcome Sanjay Lazar, aviation expert, and Vijay Gopalan, CFO, Entelis, and former CFO of Air Asia India as well. Welcome to the conversation, gentlemen. Let me begin by asking Mr. Lazar, can budding airlines like Shankh Air, Alhind Air, and FlyExpress disprove the history of failures in Indian aviation scene before, given the shutdown of 18 carriers since 1995?
Good evening, Mallica. Thank you for having me on your show, and good evening to Vijay also. Pleasure to be with him on the show. Yes, you're right. The minister has made a statement that they've issued NOCs. But NOC is the first step in a long process to the AOC, which an airline will get. And many promoters run out of breath by the time they reach that stage. And like you rightly said, we've had 18 airlines shut down since the start of the air taxi era. And it's a very tough battle. I think 2 or 3 of these carriers that have been announced are regional carriers, and one of them is already having a difficulty I'm quite well aware of in obtaining aircraft on lease because of the Go Air fiasco. So India has actually created a pretty dubious name in the leasing market, though we've belatedly added the Cape Town Convention and passed the bill. The second reason is why these promoters fail, Mallica, is because, ATF 50%, they're taxed so heavily. Every state has different rates, GST, Q, UDF, all these things. So airlines basically don't even get 40 odd percent, of its ticket fare in hand to run its cost. Adding to that, leasing costs have become expensive. They're in dollars. Dollars crossed $90 already. So huge problems. I wish them well. I know Shankh Air has been trying to start for the last 1.5 to 2 years. 24 Jan or Feb, they started the process. So I wish them well. I know Alhind is from Kerala and FlyExpress, and then there's Air Kerala also, which has an NOC. But it's really tough. But the government needs to do something special for people who are now coming into this space to disrupt the duopoly we see, or the monopoly duopoly, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. So you summarized, you said that NOC is just the first step, of course, and by the time airlines reach their final stage, they're out of breath. But I'd like to ask you a couple of more questions on taxes that you mentioned. But before that, Mr. Gopalan, financially speaking, can new airlines like Shankh Air, Alhind Air, and FlyExpress buck the trend of failures that claimed 18 Indian carriers since 1995? And do you reckon with Mr. Lazar's view?
Thanks for having me over, Mallica. And Sanjay, it's always a pleasure to be on the panel with you. Very sharp insights. In fact, Sanjay has perfectly summarized the current situation, and that's pretty much, I concur with Sanjay's views. Let me start by saying that considering that there are 3 new airlines that are on the block, or probably a bit more, I think Air Kerala, as Sanjay very rightly said, has also gotten the NOC. I really wish them well. I really wish them luck, because they will need a lot of it in this Indian aviation skies. Look, structurally, I repeat it. I can repeat it some 100,000 times. Structurally, I believe Indian aviation is not set up for corporate success. It's with a very heavy heart that I say that. And Mallica, I've been through the process of starting an airline, been through the NOC, been through the security clearances, the safety manuals, the AOP, stroke AOC, what. Sanjay is right. It's first of the many steps. And by the time we are talking about Shankh Airways, who got their NOC in 2024 January, is what I'm given to understand. But we are already 24 months down, and we're still saying that, it looks like there's still quite a distance away from getting their NOCs, their AOPs. It's not going to be easy. I think, having said that, it's not going to be easy. I don't think they should be scared saying that, this is going to be a no-go. No, but it is going to be a very, very rough path, and they should embrace themselves for it. ATF prices, I think ATF needs to be brought into GST. There needs to be uniformity in pricing. Some of the states charging 30%, 35% taxes is insane. That's not going to help. 75% of the payouts, which includes the fuel pricing, as well as the maintenance costs, the engineering costs, aircraft leasing costs, they're all in dollars. There needs to be a mechanism where there is that element of predictability in the cash outflow. There is as such no predictability in the cash inflow because revenues are heavily market determined. Despite the fact that we have a duopoly, people end up competing with the third class and second class railway fares. I mean, if the flight tickets are going to be a bit more expensive, up to 12 hours, passengers are more than happy to take a train and go now, unless the prices are cheap. So it is very, very price sensitive market. When there is lack of predictability in the inflow, and there is lack of predictability in the outflow because of the structural way our industry is structured, you are definitely not, you're not setting up an airline for a success. That's my limited point.
Okay, so ATF needs to be brought under GST, and there needs to be more predictability established in cash inflow and outflow. Point taken. But Mr. Lazar, that brings me to you. You were highlighting some specific challenges. What are those challenges? And I'd like to bring, the point that Vijay Gopalan also made, where he said that Indian aviation is not built for corporate success, and that's because of the challenges that it is currently drowned into. I'd like you to highlight some key challenges apart from the ATF prices.
I mentioned Air Kerala. Air Kerala has had pilots, it's had engineers, it's had everybody full-fledged setup since June, waiting in the wings to take off. Because of India's leasing problem with Go Air, every lessor is so scared to send aircrafts to India. So these guys are really, I'm giving you one example. So the government moved really slowly on the Cape Town Convention and passing it into a bill. Today, we've got to gain the trust of lessors. That's one. Number two, like Vijay rightly pointed out, every state has ridiculous taxes. ATF varies. If you take off from Mumbai and you go to Kolkata, and then you go to Chennai, and then you go to Kerala, and then you come to Hyderabad and land in Delhi finally, you'll find 6 different prices of ATF in the same country. And airlines cannot have this, though it's a fixed price, they know everywhere it's different. This uncertainty in a market. So he's right, ATF must be brought under GST. I also must talk about Qute, though airlines pass it on to us. If the government, put a restriction, and you can see Bombay and Delhi airports are still, fighting for a share of a bigger pie for the old constructed airports. That's also going. So Qute, UDF, PSF, there are so many little charges that add on. There is VAT, there is, 100 things that airlines need to have freedom from. I believe it's time for the government to restructure Indian aviation. Okay, you've got 4 carriers, 5 carriers, they're settled in. Give an incentive to new people coming in and say, I'll give you a tax holiday for 5 years. Or sit down with the states and say, do you want more connectivity? Let me give you you give them a tax holiday, we'll pass it on. You'll bring in foreign investment in, which is permissible up to a certain level into the aviation market. You will bring in expertise and you'll bring in big players who can take on the Air Indias, the Indigos and the Akasas, what have you. That's what we need to look at. We need to look at a proactive aviation. We're a huge market and it's not a gloom and doom market. But if you're going to kill the golden goose, you'll see these 18 become 20 very soon and 22 airlines dead. That's my limited point.
Okay. Understood. A lot of loopholes highlighted over there. But Mr. Gopalan, the Udan scheme, I'd like to bring in some focus on that scheme. It was launched with the ambition of making flying accessible and possible for every common man. With such challenges already deep-rooted in the aviation industry, and we've seen so many new airlines not being able to sustain themselves in the business of this, in India especially. To what extent do you think the Udan scheme is actually helpful? And what challenges or what changes would you recommend in the scheme, if any?
Look, Udan scheme was a very well-meaning scheme by the government, and I have to give it to that. But in my view, if I were to put a percentage to it, I think Udan probably has achieved 1/3 of its intended objective. There's so much more possibility to achieve a lot more with that scheme. But Mallica, think about this. If inherently the market is not sustainable to run an airline, whatever be the Udan scheme or whatever schemes that you bring in, it's really not incentive enough for carriers to come in and play this game. Why would they? I mean, you can't do a 2%, 3% margin business because then an investor would effectively say, why would I have to go and put it in an airline which is where I don't have clarity on cash outflow, cash inflow, and the margins as such are very low. Why would I want to put it in? I would rather put it in some other industry. So Udan is a well-meaning scheme, but unless, as Sanjay very rightly said, this is a perfect time to press the reset button. You need wholesome changes. I think the country is ready. The passengers are ready for wholesome changes. If the changes are well-meaning, passengers are willing to go through some short-term hardships. But we need to press that reset button.
So we need to press the reset button. And on that note, some of my final questions to you, Mr. Lazar, would be, why do you think flying schools in India are so expensive? And how does this impact the supply of pilots for aspiring airlines like, say, FlyExpress? Because if you look at the recent Indigo cancellation chaos crisis that happened just a few days ago and brought the entire aviation sector to a standstill for just a few days, one of the reasons why all of that chaos happened was pilot supply shortage. And then when I thought about it, I also realized that many of us, especially the middle class strata of India, cannot afford flying schools. Why do you think that's the case?
Flying is an expensive hobby or a profession. And, I don't know if you know, in the late 80s, the government set up the Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Hunar Academy at Raebareli, which was the first of its kind in the country. And they managed the costs. They brought in their own aircraft and they flew some of our most senior pilots flying today in the country, at least, in the national carrier, Air India, are from the IGRUA, some from Jet. And, I know a lot of IGRUA pilots who came in. It was a great thing and it was very reasonably priced for kids to become pilots. But the government didn't replicate that in various parts of the country, which they should have. Like you have, multiple IITs, IIMs, NIITs. Why didn't we do that? So as a result, private flying clubs also were few and far between. Kids had to go abroad to the US or South Africa, or now they are doing cadet training all over, from New Zealand to Australia to Philippines, all over the country and all over the world. We haven't seen that many flying clubs take up flying training for pilots in India. Also, the uncertainty of the weather. So in certain parts, Western Maharashtra and the western parts of India are not usable. In some parts, you don't have adequate airports. And the cost of getting aircraft for these flying schools or the private clubs is very, very, exorbitant. So that's been something that's been a sort of depressant. But Air India's just, started a school in Amravati. I think that'll kick off in March. They're getting a huge number of aircraft. That should ease it. We have some Redbird Academy that had, started a couple of schools across the country. We have a few now. I think we need a lot more, given the kind of aircraft we are going to bring in to our country. We need, another 20, 30, 50,000 pilots over the next 5-6 years, because a lot of these will retire. They'll cross the 65-year age group also. So that's something that we need to consider.
Okay. So we need to consider the fact that we need more pilots and we need more airlines. And of course, the NOC given to these airlines, although it's just the first step, but many changes are recommended. And if I had to summarize what both of you said, the common point both of you made actually was taxation. That needs to be eased, that needs to be simplified, it needs to be more organized. So thank you so much for helping us make sense of not just what's happening, but what could happen in the future. Thanks so much.